Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us here at INC Live for the UFC 301 preview show. My name is Karl Bainbridge and I'm joined by the man on the right hand side of my screen. He is the Bruno Guimaraes to my Joe Linton. He's my friend and yours. It's Joe Neal. Joe, thank you very much for joining us.
Super glad to be here. Super glad to be the Binder Rodriguez, since I am the Hispanic one here, to your Philip J. Fry, which I think that's pretty good.
I'll take it.
You get Leela, I get the Crushinator.
Well, you know what they say about the internet. Everybody has a thing for anyone on the internet. Rule 34, is it?
If it's on the internet, there's corn of it. Corn.
We have to be very politically correct here. We don't want to get demonetized again.
Yep. They're always after me. Next time they do that, just say, like, you can just say that it's prejudice to say that the Mexican guy is offensive.
I bet it's Roman Delete trying to get onto you for all the jokes you make about him in Cheyenne.
He's gonna have to deal with it. Like, if he can't stand the heat, break up with her and I'll take her.
It's a good thing you brought up that there's always something for anyone to love on the internet, because quite appropriately we're talking about UFC 301, the sort of unloved child of the UFC family. Of course, UFC 300 is in our review mirror, and we kind of expected it when it came to the UFC that they were going to load up that big supercard, which did deliver, by the way. So congratulations to the UFC for putting on a great show. But we did have this fear that the cards following it might just suffer a little bit. And I think there's no better example, in my opinion, than looking at UFC 301. Because I think there's guys on this card that I like. There's matches which could be interesting. But there's no star power, and the main event especially does feel quite thrown together.
Yeah, I think all these fights have a potential to be good. But it's, for me, it's always like fights of consequence is what draws me in. You know, I've watched fights that I know are going to be boring, but are like, well, this matters. You know, I've watched Belal Muhammad's career, you know, like. But for me, like, this fight is kind of lacking some consequence for me outside of the main event, of course, which is a title fight. Of course, it has consequence, but it's just you know, it's not great, and it's part of. I feel like I made a bad. I think I had a bad idea whenever I made that pact with a demon to make sure 300 was actually good and sacrifice the quality of UFC cards after. Oops.
I think one of the other concerns I have with this card is, obviously we're back in Brazil. It's the first time since UFC 283 that we're back in Brazil. And I've kind of noticed a trend when it comes to the UFC, which is, look, I understand that the UFC is an American product, and they're going to try and gear it towards their major audience. But this year, I've noticed that the international fans are really getting shortchanged. Like 297... wasn't a great card. 301 doesn't seem like it's going to be on paper. And then the story's coming out with UFC 304 that they're going to be starting that card at 3 o'clock in the morning in Manchester. And you just kind of think to yourself, are the international fans, I include myself in this, are we getting a bit shortchanged? Are we having our fandom taken for granted?
Yeah. Like, the only times I can think of right now is like Saudi is like probably the only ones that are treated pretty with like
in
respectful.
Abu Dhabi.
I mean, yeah, like because I remember back in the day, if a fight card was overseas, you know, I wouldn't spoil it for myself and I would watch it at the normal time for me. You know, I remember being pumped to watch Dan Hardy fight Carlos Condit and like not spoiling it for me. I did spoil Czech Congo Travis Brown, but that's, everyone can understand why I did. But then when that fight came on, I was stunned. I was blown away. I didn't know. But like, that's like now that they're making them, like trying to make it a universal time for everybody. That's not how other countries and time zones work. I think that's a little disrespectful to 3 a.m. start time. That's horrible.
And I think as well, turning things back to UFC 301, obviously it's the card going to be talked about here. I think the Brazil cards especially, I think it's really sad to see, because we do the retro reviews, like we cover these cards like time and again, and you go back and you look at the quality of some of those Brazil cards when they first went back there. Like 134 is stacked. Like, and we've gone from that to this past 3 or 4 Brazilian pay-per-views haven't lived up to it, in my opinion.
Absolutely not.
I've actually got a list here
horrible.
of the past 4 Brazilian pay-per-views which the UFC have held. And this includes 301 Pantoja versus Erceg. UFC 224, Nunes versus Pennington. Now, I love Raquel Pennington, but even I'm the first to admit she should be nowhere near a pay-per-view main event. And you add Nunes into the equation, it's one of the worst drawing shows that the company have ever done. Then we got Namajunas versus Andrade. Good fight on paper, and it delivered. But it's the only time the strawweights have ever headlined a UFC pay-per-view. Then we have Glover versus Jamal Hill. Good fight, worthy main event, but put together very last minute. Like, they were going to run with Figgy Moreno 4 as the main event. And we know the UFC will only go to flyweights as the last resort. And that brings us on to 301, another flyweight main event. I understand that being in Brazil, you're going to want a Brazilian to headline. But there is sometimes this feeling of, we'll give them anything and they'll accept it because it's Brazil.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of disrespectful, admittingly. Like, it's one thing if... Now, I'll ask you this, actually, out of genuine curiosity. Let's say the UK is not doing hot in fighters, right? Like, Leon Edwards is injured, and he's not champion, hypothetically. Tom Aspinall, same thing. You know, like, there's no... You know, Ian Gary has been disowned from Ireland. I don't know. Like, you guys don't have any like great UK talents at the top of their divisions, and the UFC wants to go to London. Like, in the past, we've gone to London with non-Americans in the main event, or non-UK guys in the main event. Like, we had Rampage Dan Henderson was a title unification bout, and that was in London. You know, would you, as someone from the UK, would you be okay with a card that didn't feature a lot of homegrown talent?
I would expect to see homegrown guys in the undercard, but it's not paramount to me to have a Brit in the main event. Like, I love that Volkov versus Verdum heavyweight fight, and obviously Brazil versus Russia.
That was fun. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's kind of my thing. Is I've seen, because like, on the flip side of that, I've seen tons of non-Americans headline cards in America, and like, there's like, you know, we have a lot of Americans in the UFC, but like at the same time, it's like, they're not the main event. So I feel like at least in like some countries, I think you can get away with that. Like, just not having, you don't need to have them in the main event, you know? That's one reason why I think they pushed, speaking of like a past video, I forgot about this until just now. That's one reason why I think the UFC was pushing Darren Till pretty hard, was he was a 2-market play in theory, because the crowd booed him in his debut. Then he started speaking perfect Portuguese, and they went, oh, maybe this guy's one of us. And, you know, and they started freaking out. So he would have been a hit in the UK and in Brazil.
That Scouse Brazilian hybrid accent is one of the strangest things to hear.
One of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. It's awesome. Big fan of accents, and that one's a personal favorite of mine. But yeah, I don't know. For some reason I have the urge to blame Dana for this.
It's an easy go-to. Easy go-to.
Yeah, because it just feels like, you know, we have the joke of last year, like saying, oh, when we'll come back next year, or come back next month to say F you Canada, and it's like, yeah, like that's kind of what I feel, you know, here. And one thing that's like, that bugs me as a fan, you know, not disrespecting any international fans or anything like that, but like, those, from a behavior standpoint of the fans in attendance, do they deserve another card?
I remember they gave Jamal Hill a lot of disrespect after beating Glover.
They were throwing stuff at Moreno, yeah, and they were walking out. Glover was retiring, and they, like, not even half the crowd was there, and they were throwing stuff at Moreno. Moreno had to, like, cover up with the belt as he's, like, running through the tunnel.
fingers crossed we have better behaviour this time around. So we're going to be doing a bit of deep dive on this card. We'll get to the main card in just a few moments' time. First off, we'll talk about the prelims. You can see those on your screen right now. Is there anything, Joe, that's really jumping off the page for you?
Carolina fights.
She does. I actually have her on my shortlist here because... And it's not for sort of like horn dog reasons. We're not being Brian Campbell here. I'm actually bringing this up because there was a lot of people that wrote off Karolina Kowalkiewicz. She'd lost 5 fights in a row. A lot of people were clamoring for her to retire. I even did make like a what happened to Karolina thumbnail ready to be uploaded. And then she's now won 4 fights in a row, admittedly against lower level competition. She's kind of in that sort of Angela Hill phase right now. The sort of like grizzled vet. And now she's back in the rankings. With that being said, though, I'm not fancying her chances. I think Asmin Lucindo is a very, very highly touted prospect.
They fed her to the wolves here. It's a little rough for her. I saw that and I went, oh, Carolina. And I initially was like, Brian Campbell. hey, Carolina's fighting. But then when I saw who she was fighting, I went, "Oh, that's rough. That's a rough one for her."
Yep.
Because for people that don't like know or seen this chick fight, they're gonna go. She doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I think Carolina has a chance. It's a rough one. That's how they catch you.
What I'm fine.
Speaking of other guys that don't have a Wikipedia page that are secretly pretty good, is those Bomb Theme brothers. And Ishmael fights on the undercard.
He does. A grizzled veteran as well, Vince Pichel.
Mm-hmm. Who is still in the UFC, and it blows my mind because I remember rooting for him on Tough live back in the day.
I remember him being one of Gregor Gillespie's like highest profile scalps when they were really pushing Gregor Gillespie as like the next big thing.
Yeah, I remember him fighting. Not my brain almost went to like Ankalaev, but I think it was. Was it? It was one of the first Russians. It was the one that Ben Henderson.
Mustafayev?
No, it wasn't him. But I remember in their debut just flung him, like German suplexed him like 40 times and got a KO that way. Like that's what I always think of too. But Vince Pichel was always super fun on Tough, and I was rooting for him to win. Just grizzled old vets. And that is very meat and potatoes, but if you can't put him away, he's going to grind you out and has pop on his punches that he could catch you early. So that should be a pretty fun one because I always like seeing those meat and potato vets like that.
You're basically, I'm in my head booking a place for him in my boys' stable already. That is my type of fighter to a T.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's 110% boy. I thought he was like out of the UFC and retired because he wasn't a young man when he got out of Tough. He was like 31, I think. So, and that was like 10 plus years ago. So it feels like, so it's like, oh, okay, like he's probably retired by now. And then I saw his name here and I went, wow, he's still going. Jeez, it's like, wow, that's good for him.
A couple of other names that stand out for me. Being a Brit, I have to make a highlight Jack Shaw. 17-1 record. He's fighting, in my opinion, at his best weight class. He's now up at featherweight, taking on Joanderson Brito, who he recently got a win over Jonathan Pierce, snapped that 5-fight winning streak. The other big name, though, the one I really want to focus on, though, Elvis Brenner. Like, this guy won over so many fans with his win over Garam last year. And he's taking on, I hope I pronounced his name right, Miktipek Orelbai, which a lot of people are touting and saying this could potentially be fight of the night.
That sounds fun, because Elvis Brenner is very fun. I saw that name and I went, it's got to be someone Karl is going to bring up. I had it in my backup. Name's here. And Jack Shore, I knew you would bring up, though. So I was like, yeah. You know, I like Jack Shore at featherweight, because he won't have like the crazy length advantage still, but but he'll still have it, you know. Yeah. There's still some Chad Mendez's running around at featherweight.
Running around the nursery that is Alpha Male.
Team Alpha Male. They have 4 rules. All right, bedtime's 8:00. Bedtime's 8:00. Have a good overhand. Have a guillotine. F TJ Dillashaw.
Do you think I think the biggest guy they have there is Mike Malott. Do you think Mike Malott goes into the Alpha Male training camp and just goes, "I am a giant"?
No, I think he goes in there quietly and then like rocks him to bed. You know, I think Mike Malott has a more motherly nature, like a parental kind of vibe to him of like, because he's Canadian, they're really nice people. So he's probably like, oh, here you go, Cody. Sorry about Figueiredo, eh? Like, you know.
Recently got a fight booked as well, Malott. It's going to be the first time he fought since the Magny fight.
That was a card that was better than this.
Well, of course it did. Raquel Pennington won the belt.
True. Yeah. True. we're mean to this card.
Let's try and power through though. So we've talked about one British boy, which is on there, and we've got another boy, which is opening up the main card. It is Paul Craig taking on Cal Baralho. It is 13 versus 14 in the middleweight division. Baralho enters this one as quite a heavy favourite, minus 360 to Paul Craig's plus 285. Unbeaten in his first 5 fights, looked quite convincing so far. Why isn't Cal Baralho getting pushed in the same way that the other middleweights are in this weight class?
There's 2 problems, I think, with him that kind of hurt it. One, I think they're a little aware that the middleweight division isn't very good, and he's been fighting these like lower middle level guys, right? Like Paul Craig's a good and reasonable step up in competition for him, because that's a guy who's probably anywhere at middleweight, even though he is kind of new to the division as well, probably ranked between, like in terms of ability, 12 to 15. I think I can understand him. So, you know, Baralho going up and fighting him makes sense. The other thing though is Baralho's kind of boring. Like he got no problem being boring, even though he does look like an educated Paulo Costa.
I always thought he looked like Schmo on steroids.
Yeah, I remember you saying that, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It's that neck tattoo that makes me go, Paulo Costa. If Paulo Costa went to school, you know, he'd probably be like, this looks pretty wizard.
I think you've hit the nail on the head in my opinion. But I will say, to their credit, I think Baralho has spun this quite well, because I think he is quite aware that he does have like a workhorse style. But
yeah,
he's marketing himself as the fighting nerd. So he's playing on that. He's playing on the fact that he's a very intelligent fighter. Cerebral is the term that his team likes to throw.
The cerebral assassin.
Yeah. So he's going to be walking around with a sledgehammer.
Yeah,
and
I'm here to take on Paul Craig.
And spend 20 minutes before the match cutting a promo.
Get the water bottle.
We are such geeks.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they say that a 747 looks tiny landing in the Grand Canyon still. My favorite Triple H line.
Yeah, I know what that's in reference to.
I didn't. I had to have someone explain.
No,
it
wasn't
to me.
wasn't that something that Jericho said about Steph, and it was when they were feuding?
Yeah, it was that feud, right? Or it was Jericho and Steph, and
of course, yes, I remember the kayfabe broke up, didn't he?
Yeah, it was like post him winning the Rumble. Yeah, because I every once in a while I still go, I want to see just like the best like insults in wrestling history. Half the videos rock, which is fair, but that's always like one of my favorites.
But I do think there is evidence, trying to get this back on track, there is evidence to back up this sort of framing of Baralho as this cerebral fighter, because one of the things I've noticed from doing the tape study, his team do a lot of research and they adapt and change their game depending on who they're fighting. So when he fought against Abus Magomedov, who's a power puncher who has a reputation for gassing, he circled a lot, tried to get Abus missing, and once he realised, hey, this guy's tiring, then he piled on the pressure. Against I hope I pronounced this right, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Mikhail,
I always butcher that name.
Mikhail, very good striker, so he made it grappling heavy, and he blew him out the water once the fight went to the ground.
Yeah.
So I expect with a Paul Craig fight, he's going to try and keep it standing. We could get a bit more of a safer Baralho performance, but he's a smart guy, and he knows how to get past people like a Paul Craig. With that being said, though, we've said the same thing about Paul Craig when he fought Ankalaev and when he fought Jamal Hill. there is no better spoiler in these heavier weight classes than Paul Craig.
He's the man at that. Like, for me, I kind of, I mean, outside of like Jimmy Crute, and for most of the Ankalaev fight, I really struggle to think of anyone just smoking him in a grappling match. Like, for a guy that looks like him and has one of the best nicknames in the UFC, he has, like, he kind of reminds me of like a young Frank Mir on the ground, because like Frank Mir was like weird as a grappler because he was super scary off his back, you know, like the Nogueira brothers were as well, but like Mir was like an American like guy doing it, and it was like, oh man, like this is terrifying. And Paul Craig finishes a lot of people off his back, which he needs to because he doesn't have the best wrestling. But I think this match is either going to be an awesome grappling match, but I know, like, I'm kind of with you on the Barallo thing where he's smart, he doesn't have the flashiest striking, and he knows the ground anything can happen with Paul Craig. He's going to want to just make this a plodding striking match, probably.
That's a fear I have. I would like to see it go to the ground because I think Barallo...
Me too.
I think Barallo is quite a good grappler in his own right. He's a little bit more control over submission, which it might make a bit of a boring match. But I think I was looking at some of the stats here for Paul Craig. Obviously, he's got 13 submissions on his record. 8 of those are triangles. And you sometimes get a guy... I think the other guy that comes to mind for me is Paul Sass, where...
Oh, he had the best.
Yeah, he was just so good at timing that triangle and just knowing exactly when to hit it.
He had such a great triangle. That's a throwback name. That's an awesome one. Paul Sass has a great triangle and leg locks too, as a Brit, and you're like, what? This guy can grapple? Like, you know, it's kind of awesome.
I love the novelty as well. I think one of the reasons I love Paul Craig is because you don't get Brits with this kind of jiu-jitsu game. It's like being Finland's best surfer.
Yeah, that's it. Because I remember us talking about Aspinall, and I was like, yeah, I heard his dad was like one of the first like legit, really good black belts to come out of the UK, and you went, that's Finland's best surfer right there. Whew, scathing and kind of accurate, you know. Oklahoma's best soccer player.
There will be one out there. I'm going to have to Google it once we get off the air.
Unironically, we have pretty good soccer players because we have a very large Mexican-American population. Like, we're very good at soccer.
Just talking about Paul Craig here, one of the things I want to sort of talk to you about when it comes to Paul Craig is this is going to be his third fight as a middleweight. In his first one, he had that win against Andre Muniz, which I thought was very impressive because Muniz himself is a pretty good grappler. And I thought, hey, Paul Craig's, he's dropped a little bit of the weight. He's not... I think one of the big issues with Paul Craig because Paul Craig's a big bloke, but I always felt he was a bit out-muscled against some of these light heavyweights. And then we had him against Brendan Allen, and I thought he fell into that same trap. So I'm just not sure whether... Is this just like a fundamental issue with Paul Craig that he's always going to be outdogged in these kind of grappling exchanges?
I don't, because he's huge and he looks like he's way stronger than he is. So I was actually kind of pumped for him at middleweight because I thought, hey, his wrestling isn't good, but now he's just going to muscle everybody down, right? And I don't know. It's one of those things where I wonder what his camps are like, because I wonder if, like, because they know how good his grappling is, are they just always refining his grappling, or are they taking time to work on striking? And if you're training locally, you're in the UK, it's really hard to get good wrestlers in at that point, and that's something he kind of needs. So I think if you gave him some like wrestling time, hell, someone's gonna have to bite that bullet and go work with Bo Nickel at some point, and train with that guy. Like, oh, this guy, like, Paul Craig could, really put it all together and just be a terrifying grappler to deal with.
I think he trains with a team called the Scottish Hit Squad, and they are quite a small team.
Yeah, sometimes that works for people. So I prefer a fighter to be where they're comfortable, not where, like, they're told to go, in a sense. So it's understandable. But man, well, one thing, Brendan Allen's just good.
Yeah.
Like he's actually turns out he's pretty good. Uh, I don't think he's title shot good, but he's good. So I think one thing we could see here is because I thought he got kind of beat up pretty good by Brendan Allen. I thought he got dominated for the most part. Is this like a case of Brendan Allen just being that good, actually, or is Paul Craig just still not a great fit for this division? Is a question I'm kind of playing in my head over and over.
I think Brendan Allen is incredibly underrated. I
Yeah.
think that, and I sort of brought this up when it came to Baralio. Maybe it's just me being somebody who values meritocracy, but when you see the likes of Baralio and Brendan Allen not getting these jumps in quality and getting these marquee opponents, and then you have a ranting moron screaming, "I smash everyone," and he's getting a fight against Robert Whittaker. It's like, you just don't really think it's all that fair, do you?
Well, it's going to be a great birthday gift for me when Robert Whittaker KOs
Fingers
him.
crossed.
So
Fingers crossed.
I think he blasts him. What day is that? It's in, because is it before or after my birthday? I can't
It's
remember.
the 22nd, I think. It's the week before Connor comes back.
Yeah, good. Oh wow, the cards are just boom boom. Oh, because it's a fight night. It's not a pay-per-view, thank God. But yeah, okay. My birthday is the 16th, so I'll be 30 and I'll be watching this fight and going, "Do it for me, Rob, please. I need this."
So which way are you leaning towards this one then?
I think Chow Bodayo. Just I don't know if it's Chow or Cow because it's. I think I've heard it said Cow, but there used to be a guy who had the same name, same first name, same spelling, and his name was Chow Magnalesh in the UFC. So I went. I need to learn Portuguese.
I think it's cow with the Portuguese pronunciation. Chow is sort of like more of an Italian thing.
Because this guy was Portuguese or Brazilian as well. Maybe there's an accent mark I'm not thinking because I'm thinking of the spelling with the letters. Maybe it's like a different like accent mark with it. Because I've heard cow for him. My brain always says chow because of that one random undercard guy from the UFC like years ago. But I think he makes this I initially had Paul Craig winning, but I think Borayo is just probably gonna try and make it the plotting striking game. Keep away, circle away from Craig until he thinks if he get a decision win his way. He's gonna nerd his way to victory.
I'm leaning the same way. I see something similar to the Volkan fight. I think Paul Craig's going to do everything he can to try and get that submission, but Baralio's not going to fall into any of those traps. So I'm going to say Baralio unanimous decision. One thing I have noticed when it comes to Baralio, we'll end on this note here, is if you look at his wins in the UFC, all come against European fighters.
Like, that's a crazy irony, especially 5-0 right now. All European guys. He's a walking Brexit.
We are doing our hardest to try and overturn that. Trust me, don't want to get political, but it's one of the worst things this country's ever done.
I know a little bit about it. I know enough about it that I felt confident making the joke.
Don't blame me, I voted Remain.
Hey,
And I think it's a lot of people believing that Ihor Potieria should have been remaining where he was. Instead, he's taking a short notice fight up against Michel Pereira in the middleweight division. Pereira enters this one as a substantial favourite. A 7-fight winning streak since losing to Tristan Connolly for Michel Pereira, which you have to say, he was, in the eyes of a lot of fans, a bit of a figure of ridicule after that Connolly fight. Since then, I think he's taken on board a lot of that criticism. He's come back and, in my opinion, looked very, very good, especially at what a lot of people believe is his ideal weight class of middleweight.
I thought he was crushing it. I thought he was doing a really good job. I was impressed with almost all of his wins, and they were all really fun performances. He even got away with basically soccer kicking Nico Price in the face doing that backflip when he's like over him, like over like almost stacked guard. He did the backflip, and his shin comes like clean on Nico Price's face, and he gets a mount as Nico Price is like going, "Ref, he kicked me. What do I do?" But and I really wanted to see Wonder Boy and Pereira, but at middleweight, less weight cutting issues, I think he's going to do very good here.
Do you think it was the Connolly fight that was that sort of trigger? Or do you think, because we've seen Michel Pereira, this guy has had a load of fights. We're talking like over 40 fights in his career, and he's had 11 losses. So, and a lot of them have come through the same means of tiring himself out, and then, I love the pipe.
Oh, it's so I don't smoke. I'm trying not to quit smoking, and this helps. Yeah. Plus, I look distinguished.
Yes. Oh. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's my Englishness rubbing off on you.
Oh, you got
Trust
me.
Trust me, UFC 302 is basically going to be an episode of Downton Abbey.
I feel like the Robert Downey Jr. version of Sherlock Holmes here. You know, an American pretending to be British.
Does that mean we're going to get Kurgan making a cameo?
Ooh, actually, yeah. If that makes you Watson, I thought, I love Rachel McAdams, but I really like the chick that Watson ended up with in that movie. So, lucky you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. Getting back on track.
Oh god, this card.
We're trying our best to distract ourselves here, but trying to get back on track here. Like, Pereira has lost fights in pretty much the same way. He does the theatrics, he goes very acrobatic, gasses himself out, loses a decision. That's been happening even when he was on the regional scene. Why do you think it's taken now for him to just try and dial that back? Do you think it was the Tristan Connolly fight?
I think that the Connolly fight brought up a conversation that I remember Justin Gaethje and Trevor Whitman talking that they had, where I think it was after the second Poirier fight, or the first Poirier fight. Justin Gaethje and Trevor Whitman sat down, and they said, Whitman asked him, like, do you want to keep doing what you're doing? Because, like, right now, you're the most exciting guy on the planet. Like, if you keep this up, you'll be the most exciting fighter of all time. Or do you want to be the best fighter on the planet? And he's like, I want to be the best fighter on the planet. He's like, okay, we got to change up. And that's where technical Gaethje came from, you know what I mean? And, or technical Gaethje. He's still pretty technical, but it's like, he's still Gaethje. It's kind of awesome. But anyways, I think that conversation probably came up for Pereira in a sense of like, hey, you're at the big show and you're going to be making tons of money, but like, you know, it's exciting, but you're losing and they could fire you. Like, maybe you should try winning. Like, do you want to be the best fighter or just be a really fun flash in the pan? And I think that might have lit a fire under him, that conversation. Because it's got to be weird. It's got to be weird, you know, to quote, like, I guess, like, to make a pro wrestling analogy again, it's probably like, let's say you're this crazy high flyer and your knees are shot. Like, would you rather keep going in that style and probably have a short flash in the pan run, or kind of develop like a safer style to keep your run going even longer that you can make more money long term? You know, it's kind of like essentially what it is. That said, he's still doing wild, crazy stuff. So yeah, it's still, we get the best of both worlds
it's
here.
Dialed back. There hasn't been a sacrifice to Michel Pereira's entertainment value. All he's done is he's like, it's the cartwheels, it's the dancing on the way to the cage. That part of it's been dialed down. And I think when he's actually in the cage, we are seeing, for me, the big thing that stands out for me with Michel Pereira, which I think a lot of the theatrics sort of like hide, is he's very explosive. Because I was watching like some of his fights, try and research for this. When you look at like when he fought Ponzinibbio, who I think is probably the closest stylistically to Pereira, uses a lot of lateral movement, stays on the outside, creates these angles because of how quickly he's moving from side to side, and then he explodes in. And it's the angles of those shots which lead to like him having so much success.
He'll like he has almost like a karate style rush, like when he finds that angle, and it kind of reminds me of like someone who practices karate, because he'll just come in with straights, and then as they're backing up and getting away, then here comes like a random Showtime kick or a flying knee. It's kind of crazy. He doesn't throw the Showtime kick as much anymore. That's one thing he's cut down on, is he's only throwing 1 or 2 a fight. No 5 or 6. He's actually like, it's funny. He's like a clown. Like when you watch him fight, you go, how do you take this guy seriously? He's great. Like he's really good, but how do you take a guy who does this crap seriously? And it kind of works for him. Like, because he's almost like a meme fighter that's actually very talented. I think I would have picked Wonder Boy maybe to beat him. I mean, I don't remember what I picked at the time, but I think Bejeda would have given him a good run, like a really good run, if not beat him. Like he's a very good fighter. He's just kind of funny. If you watch him fight.
Someone made a comparison to me with Michelle Pereira. This is going to be really, really sort of nerdy. But do you remember the show Robot Wars?
Yes.
There was a machine on there called Diotior. And Diotior was a fur-covered robot. It would nearly always get set on fire. And the team would always play it up for laughs, that sort of thing. But it was actually one of the most powerful machines in the show. And it beat like loads of top guys, but because it was like a fur-covered robot and like a big smile on its face, everyone just thought it's a clown. That's kind of Michelle Pereira.
Okay. I have always kind of related his style to being, I like moms, so I've come across this in my time. Like when you play a game with a little kid, and like a fighting game, and they just press all the buttons and they magically Hadoken you. And it's like, oh no, they figured it out, and that's all they do for the next 40 years. And that's kind of how he fights. He seems like a kid controlling and button mashing. But that's what it at least seems like. It's not quite how it is. Like he's a madman, but there's a method to his madness as post Connolly. Pre Connolly, no, no, there was no method to that madness. It was just awesome. But now there's. And he's fought huge guys. Him at middleweight, I think it's like, okay, he'll be fine. I saw him fight super heavyweights before the UFC.
And a guy who's, ironically enough, dropping down in weight is his opponent, Ihor Potieria. So this is going to be his second fight fighting at 185. His first, he took on the Polish newcomer Robert Bryczek, won that one by unanimous decision. 2-3 so far in the promotion. His losses coming to Rafael Bellato, Carlos Ulberg, and Nikolai Nagura. I hope I pronounced this right. Naguriamu. Got to be very careful with that one, bearing some of the letters being there. So 9 KOs, 6 submissions, 5 decisions. But the thing that most people talk about when it comes to Potieria is what he did to Shogun.
Never forgive him for that. I wasn't a fan of his going into that fight. Now it's like, oh.
Is this fight just being booked for the Brazilians to get revenge? That's kind of how it feels like.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of funny. He took the fight though. Like, that's like one of those weird situations where it's like, I feel like it's just a happy coincidence. I don't think it was necessarily planned. But I bet it's like, well, Potieria said he can step up. Wait a minute, you know what we could do? Like, actually, like, okay, yeah, let's do it. I think it was something like that situation. I don't think it was like a deliberate plan for the UFC to go, they got to get revenge. This guy Fortnite danced on Shogun's corpse. Like, God, I hope the revenge happens, because I see that in my nightmares. Him like Fortnite dancing, like, oh.
Has there been anything about Potieria which you've seen in your tape study that makes you think he could cause Pereira problems here?
He's got some hands, actually. Like he has some good power. He knows what to do with his hands. He can definitely put combinations together and punches together. I'm hoping off of like when Pereira tries to find that angle and then get the blitz. I'm hoping he doesn't just swivel and like turn into like a counter hook on the entry for Pereira. Like that's something he could probably try to find, is kind of try to keep his shoulders squared with Pereira, so force the angles that Pereira wants to kind of find, make it difficult, and then hope he gets impatient and then strike. I don't remember him kicking a whole lot, but in theory you could kick pretty well here, potentially, but you got to be careful. And one bane of everyone that has a boxing is all the ways you can punish head movement in MMA compared to boxing. And one of them is if they're ducking, you knee them in the face. And guess who has great flying knees?
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I think he's got hands. He has pop, and Pereira has been stung and hurt before by like people with like boxing like not pedigrees but like boxing talents, you know. Andre Fiallo, he hurt him. He hurt Pereira when they fought at welterweight. And so, you know, there's ways he can do it. Like he isn't just dead upon entry.
No, and I think
But
as well,
it's gonna be hard.
even going back to 205, you look at these early fights and you compare him to now, he has leaned out a lot. He is in fantastic shape now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like he's like just like no body fat kind of thing on him almost.
Yeah, I mean it's not Kayla Harrison bad, but he's very lean.
Kayla Harrison was when I saw her weight, I went, "Oh, that's scary." I hope she's okay. She seemed healthy, but
yeah, I made the joke because obviously they're putting betting odds now for which fighters are going to miss weight, and I made the joke and said that's the only time Kayla Harrison's going to be a betting underdog in the UFC.
absolutely, is she gonna Ben Askren it, or is she gonna be something more? That's the excitement I have for Kayla Harrison. Is she going to Ben Askren this?
Yep. So you're suggesting that Raquel Pennington runs in, throws a flying knee right at the start?
Yeah, don't do it like Diego Sanchez did. You know, which is probably my favorite Diego Sanchez moment of all time.
That poor guy was in a bad place.
I feel awful, but what makes it funny for me is John Anik like having to keep a straight face and going. Nothing there for Sanchez on that. Like you can tell he's like trying not to like laugh or anything. It's like, oh, that makes me laugh. Like John Anik even kind of trying to not to crack. Like that's pretty good.
Anik's a pro.
But yeah, I think he's a good contender for like at least the straight man, you know, commentator.
Another interesting attribute or criteria which I've noticed as well, attribute maybe not the wrongest word, but something quite quirky, is he was booked to fight Shara Magomedov on the Saudi Arabia card when he took this on short notice. But as things stand, the hope is from his camp's perspective, he's going to take this fight and still fight Shara as long as he gets cleared by the medical team. Are you okay with that?
No. It's given me like G3 getting TKO'd, then 2 weeks later he fights Hamzat vibes. Like, no, I'm so out on that. Like, I don't like Vittoria for what he did to Shogun, but no, you know, that's not fair to him. I mean, I understand why he wants to do it. You know, you kind of, every fighter has to have a little bit of that. Every fighter's egg has to be a little bit cracked, you know, so to speak. But that's just not a good call by the UFC or his camp or anybody. It's a bad idea. You see it. You see. We've seen horrible things happen in boxing from that. And granted, they're asking at least for the medical clearance. I still don't like that because what makes it even more dangerous for me is you're already looking ahead. So, like you're not like it. I don't know. It kind of feels like you're looking past it when you could get T-boned by, like you're driving and you're looking forward for the traffic ahead, not watching, you know, the stop sign you're running. Like it just seems like just such a recipe for disaster.
So are you going to be leaning towards Pereira for this one?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Pereira, and he's going to do a Helldivers dance over to you know, we need something good in there. He can do the hug emoji from Helldivers over his corpse, or not his corpse, that's horrible, but his unconscious body, just for Shogun's revenge. But in all jokes aside, I do have Pereira winning. I think it's another stoppage. It's going to continue this middleweight run.
Yeah. To be honest, all this Fortnite, Hellraiser stuff, all that sort of thing is just completely over my head.
That was like the dance. Fortnite's that game that Pateria did on him.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a kind of a cringe game. So.
Yeah, like honestly, like the last time I played a computer game, I was climbing up a cliff with Arthur Morgan dying of TB. That depressed me. That depressed me, honestly. I could not play the epilogue for like a good week. I was that down.
I cried. I'm man enough to admit I cried. there's some games that make me cry. That game made me cry like pretty hard. Because like those two games get me because the two things that always make me emotional as like when I in the media I consume is father son stories and brother stories, and it's like they got me with this one. The first game got me. This one's gonna get me too.
We'll try and change the subject then. We'll go on to fight number 3. It's quite appropriate you mentioned family connections there because
You're my family.
you knew I was going with that, didn't you?
I just now realized.
It's Anthony Smith versus Vito Petrino here in the light heavyweight division. Number 10 versus number 15. Petrino enters this one minus 410. Anthony Smith comes in at plus 320. So 12 months ago, Anthony Smith was interviewed before one of his fights and said that he didn't want to become the light heavyweight Neal Magny. Has he?
Yeah, he's absolutely become the light heavyweight Neal Magny. Yeah, he sadly is. That's such a scathing thing and a really accurate description for him, I think.
And I mean, there's no shame in that. Like, Neal Magny has made an entire career out of being, like, one of those guys who's... Like, I would see it in some ways being a gatekeeper is kind of a seal of approval. Like, you are the litmus test. You are the guy who we're going to put you against to see if you're the real deal. I would take pride in that. I even did a video on MMA's greatest gatekeepers.
Michael Bisping had a Hall of Fame career before he won the title.
Yeah.
As a gatekeeper. Like, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's a lofty position. Dare I say, like, another great gatekeeper, and just saying this name would make casual fans' heads kind of, like, get hot, is Nate Diaz is, like, one of the, like, best gatekeepers ever, in my opinion. Because he fought for the title once. It didn't work out for him, but he was always stopping guys that, or getting stopped by guys that, that had hype. You know, I always kind of felt him as a gatekeeper.
And you look at people like Cowboy Cerrone, Gary Goodridge, Tisha Torres. Rocky was there before she got the belt. These are good fighters who've had very successful careers.
Claudia, another one.
Claudia was better than a gatekeeper in my opinion.
Yeah, she was the clear number 2 for a while. But I'm trying to think of people who like were right there and never got the belt. And Cowboy's the biggest one for me. Cowboy and Bisping, pre-title Bisping. Because Bisping is the greatest ever without the title. But sadly, that kind of disqualifies him from that if you win the title late in life. Sean Strickland was that for a while too, actually, funny enough. Sean Strickland felt like that to me.
So we'll talk about Anthony Smith in a bit more detail here. 37-19 records. So we're closing in here on nearly 60 fights. His last fight was a loss against Khalil Roundtree. Khalil getting a big jump in quality coming up in a few months' time. A lot of people may be a bit down on Anthony Smith. I think he maybe says some things in the media which I think he has the issue with Anthony Smith. He has the habit of urinating on the wrong tree, as it were, and targeting the people who unfortunately are like social media darlings. But no, 2 wins over Ryan Spann, Jimmy Crute, Alexander Gustafsson, Volkan Oezdemir, Shogun. Now, admittedly, some of these guys well past their prime, but he has shown that when you put him on a big stage and you give him that sort of big marquee matchup, he can deliver.
Mm-hmm. He was really good for a while. Like, he was very, very good, I thought. Devin Clark, another name on that list, which probably one of the most scathing post-fight comments I've ever heard was when he beat Devin Clark, and he went, "Man, I'm really glad to win, because if I couldn't beat a guy like Devin Clark, I just had to call it." I'm like, dude, that is true and horrific. Like, I cannot believe you just said that. That's so rude and accurate. I'm sorry.
I have to admit, I really rooted for Anthony Smith when he went on that sort of legend killer run, because I was thinking maybe it was because light heavyweight wasn't all that good back then. He was sort of like looking for any kind of story. So this sort of middleweight journeyman going up to 205 on a whim and suddenly like finishing 3 guys in a row. you started thinking, you know what? He's like a great everyman underdog. I never thought he was going to beat John Jones. But
No.
for him to even reach that position and then he hasn't faded into insignificance as quickly as people thought. So you think, I applaud you. Hands up. Well done.
Yeah. And he's had really good fights. I think he's probably outside of Vitor, the law and any drug or any reputable drug committee. I think he's probably gotten the closest to finishing John Jones. That's a finish. Listen, if you say, hey, I can't continue and they DQ him, that's a finish. That's horrible. But admittingly, like, his Legend Killer run was really fun. He was knocking out people I like, which suck. But the Rashad Evans KO is actually kind of crazy. The Shogun one is hard to watch, but it's impressive. He got Gustafsson. Then he beat, like, I think Volkan Ozdemir at the time was like a legitimate, very good talent at 205 that no one just wanted to admit was that good. I think a lot of it was the fact that he got a title shot for the vacant belt. And a lot of people felt like, oh, that was just an excuse to give DC the belt for free, But in reality, like, no, he had definitely earned that position and that title shot, I thought. And then he beat Volkan Ozdemir. So I thought he had a really good run. And then for me, it just kind of felt like how Glover beat him and all that just kind of started that fall for him. Like the man, like not just getting beat by Glover, because there's no shame in that, but how it happened, it's kind of hard to come back from something like that. I think Father Time beat it into you.
I should point out as well, like a little bit of a disclaimer as well, because DC versus Volkan wasn't for a vacant belt.
It wasn't?
No, because John Jones won it against DC. He got drug tested, so they just gave it back to DC. So it's a no contest.
Oh. So DC finished him.
Yeah, so DC was the champion, the incumbent, against Volkan.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I thought it was for a vacant, because I remember that card. Because that was the same card. Stone Cold Stipe opened a couple Stipe Wisers on Francis Ngannou. So I always remember that card. But yeah, I remember that card, because I thought it was for a vacant. But either way, I thought he earned that title shot legitimately. Yeah. Because everyone was talking about... oh, man, I literally just forgot his name. British fighter.
Jimmy Manuwa.
Yes. Yeah, it's like he wanted to fight David Hayes, I think. Anthony Joshua also. He was wanting to fight a lot of people. And then here comes Volkan Ozdemir. Like, okay, well, there goes all that. I don't know.
What are the traits that you most like about Anthony Smith?
He's kind of a good all-arounder. He can kick with you. He's not the best at taking kicks like nowadays, but he can throw. He has good striking. It's a lot of boxing. He'll knee you. He'll kick you, elbow you. Like he's really good at using all 8 venoms in that Muay Thai philosophy. He's really good at using the 8 venoms. And he can put together some good combinations, but he also has a very solid ground game. Like, he has a lot of submissions. I feel like in this run, outside of this run of KOs, I think he's mostly gotten submissions since the John Jones fight. And he can tap you from his back. He has a triangle win. He has whenever he hurts you and has you in positions, he won't just wear himself out, pound you out. He's almost kind of not like Cal Barrio, but he's cerebral, and if he senses the finish, he's not just going to pound away and blow his gas tank. He's going to try and maintain position first and then work his way to it, which leads to him getting a lot of rear naked chokes after hurting somebody. I think he's a guy that isn't a master at one thing for me. He's kind of that jack of all trades. He just has great power, because I think his grappling's arguably just as good as his striking. But he is the master of none, and that is something that really hurts him.
I feel that way as well, and I think another thing that I sort of noticed with Anthony Smith in this sort of decline as well was Anthony Smith was always trademarked for his toughness. Like, he could take a lot of punishment, and I think a lot of his run, even as a middleweight, was the ability to survive adversity, and in the later rounds managed to just come back. And we saw that when he fought Hector Lombard, and I think Andrew Sanchez, that was a late finish as well. I think in recent fights though, it's kind of like once he gets hurt, it's a bit of it's a quick decline. It's like, oh god, it's happening again, and he's turtling up straight away.
It's got to be from that Glover fight, because I remember he turtled up really hard against Ankalaev. Like that finish was pretty brutal, and then luckily Johnny Walker isn't the finisher. Like, he isn't the best finisher nowadays at SEG. So, I mean, the big thing out of that was more so, you're taking my family.
And it's Walker's reaction. It's just like, legitimately, Johnny Walker was like, what?
It's amazing. It's one of my favorite moments ever. I understand why he's saying that. He's doing it to kind of
fire
pump himself up. Yeah, but against like that guy who's like a cartoon and how animated he is, and like how unserious it is, it's already kind of a weird moment, but then he makes it adds the levity to it, which is just awesome. But then, like, Killer Roundtree just kicked his leg off and just battered him. Like, but and he's on the up. Killer Roundtree is, of course, but it definitely seems like a lot of that post Glover, it's almost like up here just isn't quite there. Like, his body healed, but this isn't where it needs to be. I don't remember him ever yelling, "You're taking my family," in a fight before that. Like, that, I think, is like a good sign that like something isn't right here. Like, I'm not hinting that like he's having like a mental illness or mental issues. I think it's more of like he's having. I'm a big King of the Hill fan. I don't know how much King of the Hill you've watched, but there's an episode where they're getting their high school football rematch in flag football, and Hank breaks his nose, and so he gets plastic surgery to fix his nose, and he just isn't the same anymore. Like whenever he gets the ball and someone's coming up to him, he just like will drop the ball and like protect his nose, and it's kind of something similar to that. Like, he's having to like. He's amped up, ready to go in the fight, but then he gets hurt, and it's like, oh no. And I think him trying to hype himself up was like, he must have got hurt and was like, no, I can't break like I normally do. Like, I got to come up. I think there's a sign that something's wrong in the wiring currently for him.
And it's a big reason why Vitor Petrino is our 11-0 favourite here. So, 11-0 record. Last fight, he got a unanimous decision over Tyson Pedro in what was Pedro's last fight before he went off to do the celebrity boxing route. As well as Pedro, he's also got wins over Anton Tokali, Martin Prachnio, and Modestas Bukauskas. So a very international favour to Petrino's victories. What are the big things that stand out for you when it comes to Petrino? Because from my own little tape study, I think that everything he does is big. Big kicks, big punches, sort of bullies people with his takedowns. But it's a lot of... I don't think there's any sort of grace in what he does. It's all brute strength, and it's all one shot.
He's just a wrecking ball. Like, he's gonna plot in. He's gonna kick at you, and you're gonna hear it, and you're gonna feel it, and he's gonna come in with big hooks. I always think of that. I always think of like the big hooks, big power, all that. Like, that's actually a really good way to describe just big. The word big. There you go. And yeah, he comes swinging hammers for sure. It kind of reminds me a less graceful for sure, but similar kind of like berserker style of Thiago Santos in a sense.
I can see that.
Yeah, like 205 Thiago Santos, like, was definitely like just berserker going at him, and Petrino's kind of reminds me of that, like a barbarian-esque. This one isn't looking good for Anthony Smith.
It's not. I think the big avenue which I can see Petrino exploiting here is I think that Smith is going to be trying to stay quite light on his feet. Because I think the way to beat a guy like Petrino is to be quite light-footed. Just stay on the outside and just tap away at him with like jabs and just like kicks, that sort of thing. I think especially when Petrino has also had issues with cardio. We saw that when he fought against Takali. Now, admittedly, Petrino did a lot of grappling in that fight. And that does tire people out. But I think that was part of the reason why his cardio wasn't so great in that fight. And also as well, UFC debut, which plays a factor in these kind of things, adrenaline dump. But I do think Petrino is going to wrestle. I think a big weakness of Anthony Smith recently has been poor takedown defense. And if Petrino gets on top of him, I don't think Smith's going to have the submission game to try and deter him. So I could see a sort of ground and pound up against the fence. Smith starts turtling up. And
smash.
I hate that word.
I know. It kind of reminds you of the Ankalaev fight, what you're describing.
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because I do have the time for Anthony Smith.
Yeah. You don't have the time for Ankalaev. Or do you?
It depends on if he fights Pereira. It's all like an enemy of an enemy is my friend kind of situation.
It's fair. What if Hamzat fought Pereira?
Freddy versus Jason. Whoever wins, we lose.
Why is Brandy the special guest referee? I think I can definitely see that. One thing that's kind of fun for me, if let's say Anthony Smith turns back the clock a little bit, he is a gatekeeper, Anthony Smith, and he does excel in situations like this.
True.
He does very well in situations like this. That said, I just don't think this is it. I don't think Petrino should be this big of a favorite personally, but I am picking him to win in a similar way. I think he finishes Anthony Smith, and I think he's going to use punches to lead into takedowns. Like he's probably going to look to use a hook to cut off his lateral movement, cut him off, use the power, lead into a takedown, and just bully him until he breaks. And sadly, that is something that happens to Anthony Smith currently.
Do you think this is the last we're going to see of Anthony Smith? Do you think he calls it a day after this if he loses?
I think he should.
I think he should as well. I mean, he's got a media gig. He's always on the panel when it comes to the UFC fight cards. Looking very dapper, I have to say.
Yeah, looks like a grown-up Farnsworth Jr.
It's the nose. Nose.
Yeah, it's the nose. You know, like that's why his nose is different because he was on the tube. The tube was too small.
I have to say, we have on this main card, we've had a lot of heavier weight classes. So we've gone from the light heavyweight division to middleweight bouts to kick us off. It's quite interesting, therefore, that our final two fights are taking place in the smallest weight classes. So we're going to the bantamweight division for this one. And this is one divisions. Which I think a lot of people were taken by surprise when this one was announced. Jose Aldo is back for the first time in 18 months. He's going to be taking on Jonathan Martinez. Now, the fight is reportedly, from what I've heard, largely done for contractual reasons. Jose Aldo has one fight left on his UFC contract. There's a rumour that he wants to go down the celebrity boxing route. We'll ask you how you feel about that later on. Originally, the plan was for this to be Dominic Cruz. Unfortunately, Cruz has had injury issues, couldn't accept the fight. Is Jonathan Martinez a good replacement if this is going to be Jose Aldo's last fight?
This could be like a passing of the torch moment then. Because Martinez has become the scariest low kicker in the game right now. In that division, at least. Like the lower weight classes, he's the scariest low kicker. So, and you got Jose Aldo, who's probably all-time the scariest low kicker. You know, him and Gaethje probably tie that. Like
Barboza?
I think Barboza's third. But I think Gaethje and Aldo are probably more terrifying. Funny, because Barboza has more leg kick finishes.
I was actually going to bring that up, actually. There's only two people who finished UFC opponents twice with leg kicks. What is...
Martinez.
So shocked to hear that stat, weren't you?
I knocked over vape juice is what I did. Yeah.
As I was saying before, there's only ever been 2 men in the UFC who have finished 2 opponents with leg kicks. One was Edson Barboza, and the other was Jonathan Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And Martinez has some good wins lately.
Very good wins. Adrian Yanez was his most recent one. Saeed Nurmagomedov. Cub Swanson. He also beat Thomas Almeida when he was on that decline. In fact, he's on a 6-fight winning streak, with his last loss coming against my boy, Davy Grant.
Davy Grant. I watched that fight live, and because I remember liking Martinez. And then, he went high, low, high with right hand body, left hand low, right hand high, and it just, the Davy Grant special, punches that come from over here, and clobbered him, KO'd hard. That's an awesome KO for Davy Grant.
You know what? Davy Grant's one of those guys, very similar to sort of Paul Craig, like another one of my boys. One of those guys who, yes, they should be easy to beat on paper, but they just have this way to just test the mettle of all these up and comers.
They're just good. Like they if you look at their skills on paper, you go, huh, okay, sure. And then you fight them, and it's like, oh no, hold on, because Davy Grant at the time, Jonathan Martinez was the more skilled guy. Davy Grant's just a better guy at the time, Davy Grant was just good, just better than him that night. Yeah. And I like Davy Grant too.
Yeah.
But my favorite Davy Grant moment is him being upset that the trash talking dude on Tough missed weight, and he's just sitting there. Like, he's just sitting there heated the whole time. Like, the camera keeps cutting to him, and he's like, the dude's like crying because Dana just kicked him off. Get out of here, you goof. This bad Davey, man, I'm really sorry. He just given him the Australian version of De Niro in Goodfellas, like. Just that's my favorite Davy Grant moment. How heated he was so awesome. Yep. But
what would you say are the big improvements that Jonathan Martinez has shown since that Davy Grant fight?
I thought that he was a guy that was almost like willing to he was willing to put himself into the fire just to land a shot. Hey, my opponent's geared up and cocked and ready to launch a counter at me. I don't care. I'm going to throw my shot anyways. And now he's a little bit more patient for it. And he's almost waiting for his opponent to just over-tense themselves. And while he kind of is a little non-committal, and then will throw the big shot. Against Yanez is just ready to counter him at every second, right? And Martinez just kind of, non-committal shots. Yanez out of position. Here comes a bomb. Here comes a bomb of a low kick that clearly is hurting. And he comes from a weird angle because he's a southpaw. And he's kicking the inside calf, which has to hurt like crazy. And a lot of low kickers don't like kicking inside. Aldo historically didn't want to kick inside. Doesn't like to kick inside, the leg, and Gaethje really doesn't care because he's kind of he's an anomaly. Gaethje don't care, but Barboza doesn't like kick inside. Barboza will intentionally kick to the outside, even if you're on a southpaw against him sometimes. And Martinez doesn't care. He just lets it rip. And another good low kicker, I was kind of hoping he would fight. Is oh my God, Pedro Munoz.
Oh,
I wanted him to fight Pedro Munoz because I thought that's a good test for this up and coming kind of run that Martinez is having. Pedro Munoz he's getting older, but he still has he, as far as I'm concerned, he has a win on the current champ.
He won that first round.
Absolutely, I thought he was going to win the second round too. I think he was looking for a way out, admittingly, because those low kicks were really adding up. But yeah, it's what's it called? And when I mean O'Malley, I think was looking for a way out. I was like, I think he was like, yeah, I poked him. Like, I'll do it again. I gotta get something out of this. Like, because low kicks were really chopping him down. But I was really hoping that's who they would match him up with, two big low kickers going at it. And instead, the UFC was like, how about this? What if we give you the guy Pedro Munoz is the worst, Pedro Munoz is the worst version of this guy. We'll give you Jose Aldo, the greatest featherweight ever. Like, that's a crazy step up in competition. Like, I'm this fight's curious.
It is curious because Martinez is the younger fighter. He's obviously got a lot more upside than a guy in Jose Aldo who's probably going to be calling it a day after this.
Yeah.
But you look at the strengths of Jonathan Martinez and you think if there's one guy that's going to take those strengths away, it's a guy like Jose Aldo who has built a reputation on checking leg kicks. Like he fought Pedro Munoz, I think it was UFC 265.
Awesome fight.
A great fight. It's probably... I think that's one of the performances, in my opinion, where I think sometimes the fighter, you'll know a fighter's good, but they need that performance to make you realise, you know what, kudos to this guy, he is brilliant. And that was Aldo versus Munoz for me. Like, I mean, there was a lot of people who just sat up and realised, you know what, you're getting on in years, we don't know how much longer you're going to be fighting for. Take this celebration. And that's what that fight was for me.
For me, it was like, he's going to retire. I shouldn't put too much stock into this run at bantamweight. But I'm just going to enjoy him while he's here. You know? And then he did that, and I went, I have to put stock into this return. Like, this is a legit title run. Like, because, we said before, Munoz was aging, but so was Aldo. And Aldo made Munoz look like he didn't belong in there with him. And it was just, oh, here we go. Like, he looked like old Aldo at times.
I've got a list here of Jose Aldo's notable wins in the UFC and WEC as well. Rob Font, Pedro Munoz, Chito Vera, Renato Moicano, Jeremy Stevens, 2 wins over Frankie Edgar, 2 wins over Chad Mendes, the Korean Zombie, Kenny Florian, Uriah Faber, Cub Swanson. So Max has really got a really high stock right now. And the UFC will call him Volkanovski the best ever. In my opinion, the best featherweight of all time is still Jose Aldo.
It's him. If Volk would have beaten Topuria, and I'm trying to think of someone else. No, I think it was like just Topuria. I probably would have said you're just as good as Aldo. No, like it didn't happen. So Aldo is still number one, but. Like now that we're kind of, it's when you're in the moment, you tend to rate a legacy way higher than looking back, And I still think Volkanovski's obviously a top 3, and I might say him and Max are tied for second, maybe Volk number 2, but Aldo's career is unbelievable. Like I think he has a legitimate GOAT argument there. I think there's a legitimate one for him. But that could be my bias. So, because his run at bantamweight, so good.
I'm gonna have to make a video about it. Actually, I've always teased the idea. I'm kind of glad I held it off until this fight happened. But I've always had the idea of doing a video on Aldo's bantamweight run because everybody thought it was going to be a disaster.
Yeah, and then he technically lost, but he beat Marlon Moraes in a very good and close fight. And then he made the Jan fight competitive when Jan was the killer of the division that no one wanted to fight. And he made that fight incredibly competitive. And horrible stoppage, way too late. But it was a really good fight. And then Chito Vera, Pedro Munoz. Then I didn't think he was going to beat Rob Font, and he did, and it blew my mind. And it was just, here we go. And Merab, who's in my opinion, the best bantamweight on the planet, couldn't take him down, couldn't do Merab things to him, and had to Holly home him. Like that was like the only way he had a chance at beating him. I was like, that's super impressive to me.
If we look at this sort of later part of Aldo's career, especially like the bantamweight run, have there been any changes to his game? Has he refined things that he wasn't doing as a featherweight, or is he just fighting the same Jose Aldo style that we've known and loved him for?
I think you can definitely see the age still there, still affecting him, because Aldo has destroyed knees. Like his knees are very much just destroyed from years, and his back as well. He used to have a lot of back troubles when he came into the UFC, and that meant he wasn't kicking as much when his back healed up. Here comes the knee injuries, and so that's why you don't see him kick as much. He kicks a lot less than he used to, but when he does kick, it's all, everyone in the crowd is like, oh, that reminds me of the good old days, you know. um, it's definitely much more boxing centered, and he almost kind of at featherweight. I always thought of him fighting as like anti-wrestling, like he was willingly giving you his lead leg, so you would reach down and go for it, and then he uppercuts you or he knees you, and then he punishes you for trying to wrestle with him. He's giving you the leg, but he's also positioned to sidestep and tire you out by just getting out of. You're the one having to put all the pressure, and he just kind of steps out of it. And this time, it seems like at bantamweight, I kind of felt like he was almost fighting like as an anti-calf kicking. Like it seems like he was almost giving you the leg, hoping you kick it. Then he'll just do the whole bring the leg back over and over and make you miss, and then he counters off of it. Pedro Munoz fight is 90% Pedro Munoz kind of getting out jabbed. He's not winning the hand fight. If he tries it, he can't get his boxing going, so he's like, I gotta low kick him. So he goes to low kick. Aldo moves the leg out of the way, and then when he steps back down and gets the power, he sits on his shots and starts lighting him up. And that's like the whole fight, and it's fantastic. And that's something that makes me go, oh man, even if he is inactive, Martinez is going to have a really hard time dealing with this. Like, because on paper, if it wasn't for the inactivity, you go, oh, Aldo is designed to beat this guy, right?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why they've put this fight together, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I think they want it good. I think you can't lose. If you're the UFC, you can't lose here. Either you give the legend a proper send-off, and one of the greatest of all time, the best in his division all time, you get a great send-off at home, in his home country. You can't play it off any better. But if Martinez wins, that's new blood, and he's got a fantastic feather in his cap,
Definitely. I am concerned when it comes to Martinez that if Aldo was to take away those leg kicks in the way that he did with Munoz, I don't think Martinez's hands are the best to sort of compensate for it.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think his wrestling's there either, because Aldo can just double leg you out of nowhere if he wants to and beat you up from guard.
That's how he beat Cheeto, wasn't it? Very grappling heavy.
Yeah. That's one of the ways. I mean, he beat Mark Hominick everywhere, but I remember him taking Cheeto or Mark Hominick down, just power doubling him down, and then just opening up the unicorn hematoma on his head.
UFC 129 retro review.
Yes, I sickly wanted them to pop it as a kid. Yeah, I was like, I want to see what happens. Pop it. And my dad looked at me and was like, you could tell he had that moment of like, is this Hannibal Lecter? Did I raise Hannibal Lecter? Like, he kind of had that moment, and he went, Joseph. He always called me Joseph. He's like, Joseph, how about this? How about I just go 60 miles an hour on the way back home on the back roads and hit a deer? That's the same amount of blood, okay?
Oh.
Yeah, that's the same amount of blood. Like, he definitely had that sense of, like, what's wrong with you? Like, whenever I said that. Horrific. Or great fight. Horrific injury.
Which way are you going to be leaning for this one then, Joe?
I'm a diehard Aldo fan. He's probably... I still consider him retired, right? This is just a fun treat for me. I would say Aldo is probably my number 2 favorite fighter of all time. I don't like to add anybody until they retire to the list. But Aldo was my favorite active fighter for a long time. Hint, hint. The best fight of all time. I covered on a retro review coming out soon, and Aldo's in it. That's my pick for the favorite. That's my favorite fight ever. I think that's the best for me.
It's the only time you've ever given an 11 out of 10 score.
I broke the scale. Yeah, that fight, like, I've covered a lot of great fights, but that fight just, it's just like a perfect fight designed for me. Like, it just has everything I want in it in a fight. And felt very much WrestleMania-esque in the storytelling of a fight. Um, but Aldo fan, big massive Aldo fan, I gotta give him the win by decision. He doesn't seem to have the finishing power that he had at featherweight. Like the finishing threat isn't as there. But that said, I still think he's got enough to, even I'm willing to risk it, even with the inactivity that his style of fighting just destroys Martinez here, or at least on paper, it destroys him. I think he beats him by unanimous decision here.
So now we move on to our main event of the evening, and the flyweight title is on the line. Alexandre Pantoja makes a second defense of his belt, and he's going to be taking on a guy who, for a lot of people, may be fairly unknown. Steve Erceg gets the call to fight for the belt as the number 10 seed. Pantoja is the bookmaker's favourite, but you can get pretty decent money on Steve Erceg, around plus 170. So let's talk about how this fight came about. So Alexandre Pantoja made it very clear after his fight with Brandon Royval that he wanted to be on the card for UFC 301. However, because of the way that the UFC have match-made this division, because of the wins that Pantoja's had so far in this weight class, and because of injuries and other mitigating circumstances, there was a drought when it came to potential opponents. And eventually it came down to two people. It was either going to be number 8 seed Muhammad Mokaev or the number 10 seed Steve Erceg. So, Joe, based off a fairness perspective and as a fan, did the UFC make the right call going with Erceg over Mokaev?
I think there's two answers there. There's, from a fairness perspective, you got to give it to Mokaev there because he has the longer streak, and all this. But as a fan, I do not want to watch him stink up the show.
I legitimately believe, because Mokaev and Erceg both fought most recently on the same card, Steve Erceg got that second round KO of Matt Schnell, went viral. Mokaev had, let's be frank, a stinker against Alex Perez.
Yeah.
And I think that was the decision. I think the UFC were torn between the two, and once Steve Erceg did that, I think he got the call. I think he got the jump.
Steve Erceg KOing Matt Schnell, who is a known fighter pay defender. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that, yeah.
Yeah, Matt Schnell and Jake Matthews. I always root for them to lose, even though I like watching them fight because of that.
And Matt Schnell had all that MTV money as well.
I know. Yeah. He was the Mrs. Body Double.
I've got this fan fever, It's a bit of a left field hot take, but I legitimately think this. I think Muhammad Mokaev would be fighting for this belt now if this was a co-main. But because it's the main event, and because there's more of an onus on that fight delivering, the UFC couldn't risk Mokaev turning into a grappling, sort of stalling-based fight. And with Steve Erceg, I think they know there's more of a chance of him delivering on the entertainment side.
Erceg's fun. He's really fun. And Mokaev is horrible to watch. Like, I remember, I always bring this up every time his name pops up. I covered his debut on the best London card ever. And, like, the card itself was pretty okay, but I got to cover it, so it was my first debut, so that makes it the best. No, it's my favorite London card ever. It's so good. But Mokaev came out, throws just one of the fastest two-kick combinations, and then gets a double leg into a heel hook, and I went, if this guy fights like this every time, how is he not going to be the mega star? And then it turns out that was like, he just thought that was fun for one night and just wants to hold everybody down. And it has been awful. Horrific. And so they were like, this is the main event. We couldn't get a UFC 300 main event. Turns out we dilly-dallied too long on that. So let's take the main event of 301, put that there, and have Erceg come in as the co-main.
It's a really fascinating situation for the UFC, and I think it's one which is kind of their own making. I think if they did make this division a little bit better, I think we would have had somebody who was a little bit more viable. I mean, that's no disrespect to Steve Erceg, but the number 10 seed shouldn't be fighting for a belt if we frame this idea of meritocracy.
Well, Dan Hendo did.
Yes, he did, and a lot of people were upset about that.
Yeah, people
I
were
mean,
livid.
Gegard Mousasi, the best,
Quit over it.
yeah, Jack Slack's favorite fighter, he left the UFC because of it.
All time good, Gegard Mousasi. And uh, like Dan Henderson in his 40s, coming off one win in a KO over UFC flop Hector Lombard, admittingly in a fun fight with a really good KO. But he leapfrogs Gegard Mousasi, Robert Whitaker, and Yoel
Jacare.
Romero. Yeah, Jacare and Yoel Romero. What a world that was. It's a crazy one. That said, I kind of feel bad bringing that up because completely different scenarios here. Because Dan Henderson was brought in as a sacrificial lamb so Bisping can get his win back, like kind of thing. It was the War of 1812 to the first fight's 1776, if I were to quote myself from the UFC 100 retro review. Big history fan, so I know a lot of random history facts. War of 1812, you guys were kicking the hell out of us. You guys burnt the White House down. I think that counts as a win, all right? Listen, I'm not very good at chess and checkers, but that sounds like you got the king to me. Um, but anyways, all history jokes aside, Erceg is he's here partially on merit and partially because they need somebody, but that doesn't make him any less of a threat towards Pantoja. Pantoja is hittable, and Erceg has power at flyweight. So there's something there. Like you said, there's some good money to be made on Erceg here. Absolutely. But it's a big if because Pantoja's hot.
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about Pantoja in a bit more detail here. 27-5 record. His last fight was that win over Brandon Royval. Notable wins in the division include those 2 wins over Royval, 2 wins over Moreno, Alex Perez, Manel Karp, Matt Schnell, and also quite early on in his tenure, he also beat Wilson Hayes. So
Huge.
a pretty decent run of fighters here in the flyweight division. That being said, though, I think Pantoja is very good and a worthy champion, I do sometimes get the impression that people are maybe over-exaggerating how good he is. Like, I am seeing people out there saying he's cleaned out the division when he's only had one defense.
Yeah. Divisions, the problem is he didn't clean the division out. The division kind of beat itself up pretty hard.
Because he just kept pitting the same guys against one another. Like, Kai Kara France would be fighting Albazi one week, and then he'd be fighting Karp and people like that. It was just the same guys just seemed to be fighting each other all the time. While they were doing Figgy Moreno 10 million times.
It's like that whole Figgy Moreno thing, as great as those fights were, every one of those fights is fantastic. That said, it was Figgy becoming champion brought a ton of life just quickly inserted to the division, and their first fight is what made everybody go, this division's nuts. Like, this rivalry is gonna be great. It took so long to finish that rivalry because of all the controversies, I think, that it just kind of hurt this division pretty good. And then, like, look at now, like Moreno, he's taking an indefinite break because he's just kind of fighting himself out, and his mental's a little messed up. I think he said he was like, just not in the right headspace. Like, I'm just way too aggressive trying to get this over with. And Royval still good, but that could be a third fight with Pantoja, another rematch. Manel Cape, who is interesting as a top level threat, yeah, that's a rematch. But he hasn't cleared out this division. That's clearing out the division for me is like GSP levels of like, okay, I guess we can do John Fitch again.
I saw a comment on Twitter, which I think sums up sometimes like the double standards when it comes to fans. So Islam Makhachev holds wins over 3 of the current top 10.
Yes.
And he's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. Pantoja holds wins over 4 of the current top 10, cleaned out the division. Raquel Pennington holds wins over 6 of the current top 10, paper champion.
That's crazy, huh? It's crazy.
Yeah.
Calling Rocky a paper champion is incredibly disrespectful to that division and her. I understand how someone could make the leap to wanting to call her that, because, yeah, she didn't beat Nunes, and we saw what happened when they fought, but it's not fair. Like, you know, whether you're a Nunes fan or not, she was clearly the head and shoulders better than that division. And it's not quite fair. Let her retire. Like, it's just, the division has to move on. You know, it's like if Ronda never fought Holly Holm and retired after Betch Koheda. Like, would people say that about Holly? Like, that's not, that, it just feels like really disrespectful to that whole, and a division that admittingly needs help.
Yes.
Like Juliana Pena's the draw there. Oh.
I quite like Juliana in a kind of like a comedy heel way.
She's
She's Santino.
I was gonna say, is she your Miz circa 2016, 2016?
That's actually a bit better, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, she my favorite run of the Miz, honestly.
So obviously we've talked about Pantoja and the standing that he has among MMA fans. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the big sort of X's and O's that's got him to the top? Because I think a lot of people sort of frame him as just bull rushes, yeah, big flurry, gets a takedown, submits, yeah. Is there more to his game than that?
I mean, he can clearly wrestle, and he does have pop in his hands. And he's a very smart fighter. He doesn't have the best gas tank in the world, so he has been working on managing his own energy, which is a great sign, I think, of a fighter understanding their limits, working to fix it, while also addressing the issue directly. You know, it's it's not like I can't deal with a ducking jab, I just change stances. There's a spider in my house, I just bought a new house instead. You know, and I think I like that is kind of what he does, though. He does just blitz you. He has pop in his hands, so he can hurt you if you let him. And then off the blitz, he's going to take you down. And as of recently, he's been just kind of controlling. Like, he hasn't really gotten those decisions or the submission wins, but he's been aggressively. His jiu-jitsu is actually really fun, even if it's very controlling. The flyweight division, controlling in the flyweight division usually means like a faster pace than anything heavyweight has had in 20 years, you know? So, like, Pantoja's trying to defend, Royval's bucking and trying to kick off and always moving, always working, and Pantoja is having to kind of metaphorically break this bucking bronco in a sense. And it's really fun.
It has been fun, and that's one thing I will say about Pantoja. He is a fun fighter, because grapplers usually have a reputation for being a bit grimy, a bit dirty. But, you know, Pantoja's grappling I do find very entertaining. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how that grappling fares up against a guy in Steve Erceg, who so far in his UFC career has shown that he's been able to avoid any kind of takedown threat from his opponents and has shown some really good hands.
JDM partner, isn't he?
I think so. I think he might be. He's definitely not CKB. I think that a lot of people think that he's CKB, but
he's not CKB. I know that. He has to. I think he's JDM because he kind of reminds me of him. You know, in a sense, these very good wall walking, butterfly guard using, like get to his feet. Like because Erceg in a lot of times if he was taken down, it was only for like this. He was up instantly. You know, and it kind of reminds me of JDM. And when he's on the feet, his hands, he can work his hands pretty well. Do you think
that his quality of opposition is maybe making him seem a bit better than he is? Because if you look at the guys he's fought in the UFC, like David Dvorak had a good winning record, but some people saw him as a little bit of a can crusher. His regional competition maybe wasn't the best. Then there was Alessandro Costa, who took that fight on short notice. And Matt Schnell, who I think is a good all-rounder, but has always had issues with his chin.
Yeah, he's the gatekeeper at flyweight, admittingly. Matt Schnell, that's what kind of Matt Schnell is for me. He's the gatekeeper at flyweight. Yes, I think that helps him out. I mean, one thing that helps out with is the Matt Schnell one, because Matt Schnell is always looking to go. He's always brings it, and he's very hittable. So that makes a guy like Erceg, who now fighting a guy who also doesn't have the best chin in the world, that's very hittable and makes like a high-paced fight. That's a really good matchup and a fun way to showcase a guy like Steve Erceg. So that definitely makes sense to me, that you can say his competition has made him seem better than he is. That said, I still think he's pretty good. I think he's good. I think he would have gotten a title shot legitimately at some point if it wasn't, even without the circumstances of why he got this one.
And so a lot has been made about Steve Erceg's boxing ability. And I will say that his hands have looked very good, which is strange for me, because if you actually look at Steve Erceg's record, the Schnell fight was only his second KO. He's got 6 wins by submission.
Yeah. I noticed that when I pulled up all his fights list to kind of watch them all, and I went, wow. Because the Matt Schnell one's like pretty fresh in my mind. So that like really shocked me when I was pulling these up. I was like, whoa. Like, he's mostly a submission threat? That's kind of wild.
So is it just... Are there any sort of intangibles in regards to his striking game? Is there anything you've noticed that he likes to do or not do that maybe could give an indication of which way this fight goes?
One thing I like is like a lot of times you'll see guys when they throw check left hooks on a guy trying to use his entry points, some guy trying to move in to gain entry in close or attack. Like a lot of times guys will just throw like a check hook with their lead hand. Sometimes he will throw it, but he's mostly circling and jabbing or rolling and coming with the right hand. I really like that. I also like that he's a big proponent of closing the door. He'll end combinations with his lead hand to not leave himself out of position, something I love. Gilbert Melendez is the biggest criminal offender of that ideology, because it's always jab, jab, massive right hand, then having to reset his position, leaving him open. That's how Diego Sanchez caught him in the Mexican World War.
I love that fight. I really love that fight.
So good. So good card too, if I remember correctly. That card is awesome, and that fight is incredible. But Gilbert was so much fun for a while, but not good enough to earn his real name back.
A couple of things I've noticed with Steve Erceg. It's mainly more the sort of, dare I say, negative sides of his striking game. I think that he's maybe a bit vulnerable to overhands. Which being a taller, lankier fighter, that's always going to be a big weakness you're going to have to face. And I don't think he has much of a counter-striking game. Like, Steve Erceg's first instinct when it comes to trying to evade
move forward,
trying to evade what his opponent's got coming back at him, is to move backwards. So if you do rack up that sort of 3 or 4 strike combination, you have the chance of catching him by doing that, because he's just instantly moving backward. And when you got Pantoja, whose first instinct is blitz forward, big punches, I think that's more of a concern, because I think that, to me, is the way that you're going to beat Pantoja. Is either you're going to have to catch him coming in, or you're going to tire him out and get him in the later rounds.
I think, because for me, when I think of Erceg is, because he has tall guy defense. We always talk about it. A real bad case of tall guy defense. He'll just kind of move backwards and lean back a little bit. But I remember, I forgot. I think it was the Costa fight. Costa makes a rush at him, and he kind of just like that kind of thing. And then as soon as he hit the cage, he threw a right hand, which I was like, oh, that's fun. But yeah, he's real susceptible to getting pressed against that cage and getting thrown down. And it's like his footwork's good, but it's not good on the defensive which is what you need against a guy who's going to blitz you. You almost want someone who's going to, like, I agree with you on if you're going to beat Pantoja, you have to be wearing him out with body shots early, and like when he makes the blitz, standing your ground and countering off.
Because I still think cardio is a big concern for Pantoja, because
I'm still not convinced of.
Like, a lot of people forget Royval had a ton of success when that fight got into the later rounds.
Yeah, he nearly came back. Like, Pantoja cleaned his clock essentially for 3 rounds, and then here comes Royval nearly coming back, nearly getting a finish. And against Moreno was piecing him up on the feet, and then here comes but it's a lot of the wrestling and gas takedowns coming in, and Pantoja wasn't the aggressor in the later rounds against Moreno, if I remember correctly. That was one I didn't watch because it hurts.
So, do you think that this is a fight which is as close as some people are trying to make it out to be, or do you think this is a case of people trying to, make this seem like a closer fight than it is because of Steve Erceg, like, coming in out of nowhere and thinking, no, you have got to watch this fight, this is what Steve Erceg does brilliantly? Are we being Brendan Schaub here, trying to make a case for Conor McGregor to be Floyd?
I think it's something more in the middle. I refuse to, and I will never be Brendan Schaub saying Conor McGregor's.
And I love that skit as well, because like Mauro saying, "Oh, what you're talking about? Floyd's going to beat him," but the angles, he's used to different angles.
Friend of the channel, Beige Frequency. I always think of quotes from him when Brendan Schaub's name comes up. Which, not to get sidetracked, I saw that you were in the inner circle of social media Twitter buddies with OSW, so a can of Coke to you.
Thank you very much. Here I am drinking Pepsi.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm drinking a Diet Dr. Pepper because it tastes better than Diet Coke. But I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think part of our job, is to come in. I always say, hey, this is my opinion. This is in my prediction. Here's some potential bias I could have. So I may be crazy. But part of our job is to come in here and be professionals when it comes to a fight and everything like that. Steve Erceg, I think we were telling the truth in the fact that Steve Erceg does have power, which you can never count out, and Pantoja is hittable, and he does have his gas tank. We're not convinced 34. Of yet. Yeah, he is past the 30. That's the Kerr stage, but Volkanovski did break it.
35's the curse.
35. Chris 35. Yeah, 30. He's got 1 year left. But that said, we're never going to go in here and be the disrespectful guys and go, man, Pantoja's fighting some guy. Who cares? Like, Pantoja win next. Like, that's just not what we do. But at the same time, I am picking Pantoja.
I'm picking Pantoja to win this one as well. I think that even though Steve Erceg has a lot of skills on the feet, which I think could cause Pantoja problems, I think that Pantoja's chin's going to hold up, and I can see a gulp in quality when it goes to the ground. Even though Steve Erceg does have a grappling base, I don't think it's anywhere near the level of Pantoja.
Pantoja has every fight with a similar game plan to prime Damian Maia, but with a better striking game and a much more exciting ground game. And that's one reason why I'm a fan of Pantoja, is because he feels like a surrogate. It feels like a surrogate fandom for Damian Maia in a sense. That said, I think he backpacks him, and I think he taps him out in rounds 3 or maybe late round 2. If not, he's going to have the first 3 rounds in the books. I think he survives and wins a decision.
I'm going to go round 3.
At worst.
Round 3 submission.
Yeah. I think so too. I think he backpacks him and taps him.
And finally, one more question. When UFC 301 is in the books and the UFC start counting up those pay-per-view buys, somewhere in Florida is Amanda Nunes celebrating that she's no longer the worst drawing pay-per-view of the modern era.
Mm-hmm. I don't think she can hear your scathing remarks when sitting on like all the crowns and accolades and trophies along with her
I will say,
oh,
if
what's
there
it
is a pro fighter who is that sort of insecure that they watch this porky little preview show, I'm going to be very
it would be
concerned.
Hamzat. It would be Hamzat. Yeah. Listen, I think of it this way, right? If anyone has any gripe with anything we say, we are all in jest and fun, and we have a great time here. There's only one guy that has any reason to be upset with us. Roman Dolce, you're taking everything I work for. You're taking everything I work for. I want you to break up with Cheyenne. We all know who the real man is.
And on that cheery note, Joe, we have managed to make it through the UFC 301 preview show, which I think both of us were both dreading this going into it. But I think we managed to get something pretty decent out of this.
A lot of fun. I literally texted you, I think it was yesterday, the day before, and I went, like, oh, dude, this is so hard to be motivated for. To research this. I just delayed it until a couple, like, about, I wasn't 12 hours ago. It was yesterday during the day when I
So we
researched this.
hope that you have enjoyed this preview show here, and we hope that you do stick to INC Live. Hopefully, Joe will have had his recap recorded of Nicolau versus Alex Perez. So as that should be online by now, this goes out a little bit later on in the day. And also, if you stick around with INC Live, you will also get the chance to see two more preview shows after this. No, we're not that obsessed. No, you would have the chance to see two of our retro reviews. Now, normally, we put a poll out to ask people which event they want us to watch. But if you donate to the Patreon page, you'll be able to get priority and we'll be able to cover any event that you like. And that's exactly what two of our Patreons have done. So, Joe, what hopefully will people look forward to this month?
It's been a long time coming. We had a lot of editor issues and stuff like that on our end, but we've decided to take it into our own hands, put the power in our hands again. And the first one is one that's I hold near and dear to my heart. Back when they used to do Super Bowl weekend fight cards, my favorite fight of all time we get to cover. And Jose Aldo, UFC 156, Jose Aldo versus Frankie Edgar. It's my favorite fight of all time. It feels like a fight that was specifically designed for like what I want in fights to have, and it still does it. It still holds up. It's fantastic. And the second one is, we all know here on the show, if you know me, you know my style of comedy. There's three people in MMA I love making fun of more than anything. Tito Ortiz, Henry Cejudo, and number one is Jonathan Jones. And we get to talk about probably his best fight in terms of quality and everything in 165 when he took on Alexander Gustafsson. And we get to kind of analyze his techniques in that fight, such as doing a line of coke potentially before the fight. And notice how he has to be he didn't drive himself to the event because they wanted him to show up and not go to jail. A lot of fun things like that. Plus, that card's actually just really general. I have very fond memories of that card watching it live as well.
So those are the two cards that you can look forward to. We've also got another Patreon request, which we'll hopefully try and get to in the coming months. June, though, we're going to be turning our attention to, we're going to be celebrating Pride Month. But it's not the Pride that you think of. We're going to be celebrating that great Japanese promotion, Pride Fighting Championships. So 2 videos on the main channel will focus on the great Japanese promotion itself, as well as a Pride-themed retro review. So the poll is out on the main page. Joe, what are our 4 nominees for our classic Pride card?
Our classic Pride card. And now, this one is just near and dear to my heart because for me, I remember once I went to a Pride parade. I was beyond excited. I'm delaying time so the poll can load up. This did not happen, but I went to a Pride parade. I was excited to talk about like great fights like Little Nog and Shogun, and probably in my opinion the best heavyweight fight ever, which is Crow Cop and Fedor, and no one wanted to talk about it. I was really confused. Um, it's
Yes.
loading up now. But like Pride though is that's my favorite promotion of all time. I think if you were to look at it in a like what has the percentage of best fights, the UFC probably is a better promotion in quality overall, but Pride is so good. We have Pride Final Conflict 2005. We have a loading screen and the loading. Notice how unprepared I am for this.
Would you like?
I also
Would you
blame
like
my
me to bail
computer.
you out? Yeah.
Yes, I would like you to bail me out.
So we have 4 nominees for our Pride poll, and you can go to our community tab on the main INC channel and choose which one you want us to review. So we have Pride Total Elimination 2003, Joey Styles' favourite event, the opening round of the Pride Middleweight Grand Prix, where UFC President Dana White, in his feud with Pride boss Nobuhiko Sakakibara, entered Chuck Liddell to compete and hopefully win that competition. So the opening round of that contest will see Liddell take on Alistair Overeem, which was a classic dream match. Other matches include Kazushi Sakuraba versus Wanderlei Silva and Mirko Cro Cop taking on Igor Vovchanchyn. Pride Critical Countdown 2004, and it's the night that Tokyo turns into Slam City with 2 of the most iconic slams of all time. Kevin Randleman takes on Fedor Emelianenko in the main event, as well as Quinton Rampage Jackson versus Ricardo Arona. Pride Shockwave 2004, a great New Year's Eve card. Fedor versus Big Nog in their trilogy fight. Mark Hunt versus Wanderlei Silva. And a certain Anderson Silva at the wrong end of one of the most famous submissions of all time. And finally, the other nominee is Pride Final Conflict 2005 and the Dream Heavyweight Super Fight. Fedor Emelianenko, Mirko Cro Cop. Who is the world's best heavyweight?
You literally just said 4 of my favorite events of all time. Pride has my favorite cards of all. I love UFC 217, but we've only covered Pride 33 on the Retro Review series, and I think I like this card more than Pride. It just loaded up, by the way. Shows you how crap my PC is. I didn't have my browser up, so it had to launch the browser, and then it had to load the computer. But yeah, it's like 217 is fantastic. I like Pride 33 slightly less, maybe, but man, like all these events, I think I like more. Pride has some of the most fun moments ever.
So that is something that we can look forward to in a few weeks' time. Obviously, we'll close the poll, and that one should be out at the end of June. It's going to be at the end of May that we see each other again, Joe, because it's going to be UFC 302. The lightweight title is on the line. Can Dustin Poirier crown off his career by pulling off a big upset and finally claiming that lightweight goal? That's what we will be talking about in 3 weeks' time when you are back here.
It's going to
be May. And it's going to be a goodbye from us as well. Thank you very much for joining us here. UFC 301 preview show is in the books. My name's been Karl Bainbridge. That's been Joe Neal. And we'll see you again in 3 weeks' time. Bye-bye for now.